My name's Russell Spatz. I'm an alcoholic. So I'm my 46th year of recovery. I'm 77 years old. Hit or miss whether I'm going to make it through the meeting, kind of shaky. But that would be a good way to go. Sandy Beach went that way. Bam, right at a meeting, But so don't stress me out. So I've got some interesting news for you, some good news for you. Number one, this is a Step 11 meeting, and surprise, surprise, I'm going to talk only about Step 11. This is going to be a real Step 11 meeting. I personally believe, in my opinion, this is going to be about the realest Step 11 meeting you have ever been to in your entire lives. But you'll be the judge of that. Boy, I'll tell you, that's a hell of a post, right? I'll tell you why I think it's going to be a real Step 11 meeting. And I love the newcomers. I love newcomers so much that I am willing to risk their lives in telling the truth. I'm not going to filter out anything because it may disturb somebody, or not say things because I might hurt their feelings. I'm just going to tell you straight out, Plus, quite honestly, I used to be intelligent and smart, and but by the time I got a whole bunch of time, I have left two neurons working, and maybe that's left, and they're waving goodbye to each other. So I can't carry a thought too much. I can't remember much of anything. So the best way for me to share and to go through anything is to try to be as transparent as possible and just tell you the truth. Because if you talk about the truth, you can hardly go wrong. I can't go through the filter. Well, I can't say this. I can't say that. I can't say Jesus. I can't do that. So this is the way I'm going to do it. You ever hear the thing? I speak at all these meetings. They say, in one meeting, I said, well, what's the format? It says, you do your ESH. I said, I don't even know what that is. What I mean, EH. He said, Romy said, it's an ESH meeting. I said, I've been around 40. I don't know what that is. His ESH. He says, he said, this is how stupid I am. He says, your experience, strength, and hope. What it was like, what happened, and what it's like now, right? So when I started doing this, 40-something years ago, I would have books underlined in the 12 and 12, and I would explain to you what the 11th step is all about and how it works and why it works. I'd pontificate on that, and it bordered on preaching, but, telling you the ins, outs, and how people and blah, and all that sort of stuff. And, I don't do any of that stuff anymore, ever. I basically try to talk a lot about my experience, what I've seen happen in my own life, what I've seen happen with other people. And so the reason I know this is going to be a Step 11 meeting is I'm going to do my experience, strength, and hope on my 11th step. You understand? In other words, I'm going to tell you what it was like when I was an atheist, agnostic, didn't give a crap about God, didn't even come on I can't even say I hated him or I didn't hate him. It wasn't part of my life. What happened and how I got to 46 years, and he's the central fact of my life, and it's the only thing I think about, and I became a born-again Christian, everything like that, I'm just going to tell you, you don't have to do any of this. You can say this doesn't apply to me. You can say I'm offended that he's even talked that way, but you know something? This is going to be my experience, my strength, my hope, my testimony. If you get something out of it, fine. You don't get something out of it, fine. You get whatever you get out of it. Take what you like and give the rest. But I know it's going to be totally on the 11th step because it's going to be on my 11th step, and I'm the only 11th step. That's the only step I know about, so I'm not going to talk about somebody else's 11th step or your 11th step or anything like that. And we'll see how this thing works. And I'll probably sort of mention a bunch of things in the big book and the 12 and 12 and stuff like that. I do want to mention the fact that the big book says that when we're up here, what we're supposed to do is every alcoholic, using his own language and from his own point of view, is supposed to talk about, this is what we're supposed to talk about, how we developed our relationship with God. So I'm not going to be give you some sort of general sort of bullshit, thing that doesn't. I'm going to tell you, this is what happened to me, and I was there when it happened. So I was there. So I'm going to tell you how it happened, And now you might want to. Now let me start off by saying what you're not going to hear, or what you. So you might want to hear, because in my life now, the Lord is the central part of my life. He's the most important. He's more important to me than my wife, my children, my grandchildren, or anything in this world. I've devoted my life to him. I have no bucket list. I have nothing I need to buy or do or owe or whatever it is that deal is. I think about him all the time. Because, by the way, the 11th step is we improve our conscious contact with God. It's not like we sort of walk around every once in a while, we think about him and stuff like that. It's we increase and improve our conscious. Now, I used to drink in bars. And when I was drinking in a bar, I might be talking to one of my buddies and talking about the football game, but the only thing I was thinking about was the blonde on the other side of the bar and how I could get into her pants. I mean, that was like the primary thing. While I'm talking to this guy, my whole life was about hunting in bars for women. That surpassed everything. I would run over my mother with a tractor trailer to get laid. You understand what I'm saying? Now, yeah, you guys are laughing because you don't know what it's like. But I'm just telling you, that was my, you know what the big book says? It says, well, if you identify with that in any way, that's probably a good thing. But the bottom line is, what the big book says is the people don't make it are incapable of living a life that demands rigorous honesty. There's a life that demands rigorous honesty. And then there's a life that demands that you be totally dishonest about yourself and other people and not understand anything and be delusional and think things about yourself that are not even true. Like saying to yourself you don't care what other people think about you when your whole life is spending money you don't have to buy things you don't even need to impress people you don't even like. Thinking that you're a good person when you're a selfish piece of crap. Thinking things about you which are absolutely untrue. So the bottom line is, so the question is, how did I go? So the question is, now the drinking thing, everybody stops drinking, I think if I was going to work on the first step or the second or third of the drinking thing, which AA is great at, quite frankly, great at. If somebody can't stop drinking, I'm sending them to AA. I'm sending them to AA. That's not necessarily where they're going to find God, but I would send them to AA for the drinking thing. Absolutely the best thing in the world that works, okay? So the drinking thing is great. And I would tell my experience, strength, and hope on the drinking stuff. It would be, I was like, and then I drank this, and then I drank that, and then I did this, and then I drank, and then I drank, and then I drank, and then I drank, and my wife left me, and then I drank, and then I drugged, and then they arrested me, and then I drank, and I would tell you all about drinking, and then blah, 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 this happened, and I heard this, and then I stopped drinking, and I haven't had a drink, and I would tell you all about it. It would be like a miracle. But that really has very little to do with finding God now. And I'll explain. So the bottom line is, if you were to say to me, okay, Russ, you're telling me about what your life is now. So how did that happen? You might want to know, well, how did that happen? And here's my answer. I don't know. So you might say, well, when did that happen? And I would say, I don't know. Why did that happen? I don't know. All I know is one day I couldn't stop drinking, and the next day I stopped drinking, and then 3 days after that I couldn't see myself ever drinking again, and I was okay with that. You say to me, how did that happen? I don't know. I could tell you a lot of stuff that happened around that. I could say a guy came up to me, a guy said this, a guy said that, this said this, this said that. People have been talking to me on. I hit bottom. I could use all sorts of terms. But if you really ask me, how is it that you stopped drinking? What happened? I'd say, I don't know. All I know is that one day I couldn't stop drinking. Never thought I could stop drinking. The next day I stopped drinking. Something happened. And the best I could say to you, if I was going to be honest, I'd say something happened. A lot of us, and a lot of people in AA, and a lot of people think it had something to do with God. As a matter of fact, the entire book thinks it had something to do with God. So let me just throw out some stuff to you, and then I'll go through my journey, how I got to where I am right now. There's a line in the book that says, before the steps, before everything in the book, there's this line in the book. It says, it talks about how our problem is lack of power. We had to find the power that would solve our drinking problem. We had to find a power that would solve all our problems. And then this is what the line says. This is before the steps, before anything. It says this, okay? It says, there is one who has all power. That one is God. Has anybody ever heard that? There is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. That's what it says, okay? So what if that's true? I'm just going to suggest, what if they're not lying? What if we know it was God inspired, that Bill Wilson at 3.5 years couldn't have done this thing? What if that statement is true? There is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. Do you think it is possible to do all the steps and do everything in this program, sponsor people, intensive work with alcoholics, and come to 10, 15, 20 years down the road and not have any better idea of who God is than when you had 3 months? Believe it or not have any idea who God is than when you had 3 months. But you stopped drinking, but you're not drinking. You know? Well, listen, the big book says God must become the central fact of your life. God is everything, or he is nothing. That's right out of the big book. What if that's true? What if it's not just something they sort of threw in there, just for, what the heck of it? What if that, I know it's not Appendix 2 where it says it's not a big deal or whatever the heck Bill says, but what if saying a statement like, God is everything or he's nothing, what's your decision going to be? What if that's true? What if that's true? We know what the fourth step, we know what the fifth step is, but there's this a bold statement. Okay, what about this? It says, half measures, being lukewarm on this, half measures gives you nothing. It's not enough to say, well, yeah, I believe in God, or pray at an AA meeting every once in a while and stuff like that, and then sort of go on with your life and, buy and sell and drive and go and home to work. But what if it's true that he's either everything or nothing, and half measures will give you nothing? What if that's true? I'm just saying, what if it's true? We have a lot of people, a crap load of people, that drink after they get sober. We might even have people in here who have an experience of having 6 months, 8 months, 10 months, a year, 5 years, 10 years, right in this very room. Happens all the time. That got a time, went to meetings, sponsored people and everything, and then drank again. And we could say things, well, he stopped going to meetings. We could say all sorts of stuff, trying to dissect that thing. But what if the real problem was, just offhand, that the stuff I'm talking about now, having a conscious contact with God, improving your contact with God, God is everything or he's nothing. What's your decision going to be? Burn the idea into every alcoholic's mind that he could do anything as long as he trusts God. What if the real problem is not that he didn't do the steps, not that he didn't go to meetings, not that he didn't do everything like that. What if the real problem was he never worked that side of the program? See, there's a program which is a bunch of instructions on to do certain things mechanically that everybody who comes in almost everybody who comes today, I think, tries to do. Goes to meetings, don't drink, and everything like that. and that kind of stuff. But what if there's another side? What if there's another side to the program? The side that it talks about in the last page of the big book, where it says, but you may say, but we don't know you, Bill Wilson. We haven't met you, but what are we going to do without you? And that side says, that's not important. God will determine that. Your real reliance must be on God. He will show you how to create the fellowship you crave. He will show you who to associate with. He will even show you who you should hang out with. See to it that your relationship with him, who's him? He's the guy who has all power. May you find him now. So the bottom line, see that your relationship with him is right, and great events will come to pass for you and countless others. He says, you will meet some of us in the fellowship of the Spirit. The fellowship of the Spirit. And those will be the people who's got a conscious contact with God. Where God's the central fact of their lives. Looking at that deal. I mean, what if all that stuff, and there's a ton more, I can just go through how much. What about that part where it says, if a mere code of morals, or a better philosophy of life, where you do everything in the steps, and you be kind, and you be generous, and you sponsor people. If a mere code of morals, better philosophy of life, do this, do that, go to meetings, were enough, we'd be sober a long time ago. But such morals, such philosophies never worked for us. Lack of power was our lever. We had to find a power that would solve all our problems. And that means we wrote a book where, of course, we're going to talk about God. Here's where agnostics have a problem. You know what an agnostic is? An agnostic is, you ready for this? A non-believer. You see, there's atheists who say, I definitely do not believe and I'm never going to believe. And there's the agnostics saying, well, I don't know. So atheists and agnostics are non-believers. God is not the central factor of their lives. An agnostic is not like a kind of believer. He doesn't believe. He's not saying no, he just doesn't believe. And an atheist is a non-believer. What about that part in the big book where it says atheism, agnosticism, these things must be abandoned? Now, this isn't my opinion. This is what I'm saying. What if everything I just said, what if it's the truth? What if you do? Now, I believe, based upon what I've seen, that there's nothing wrong with the steps. The steps will stop you from drinking, maybe stop you from drinking for 20, 30 years. But to do all the steps mechanically and to stop drinking for 10 or 20 years in the face of a dis-ease that doesn't have anything to do really with drinking. The big book says drinking is a symptom of the disease. The real insanity centers in your mind. If you're an alcoholic and you're crazy, even if you're not drinking. As a matter of fact, even when I was drinking, most of the time I was sober. I'd love to say alcohol caused me to hurt people. Most people I hurt and I ripped apart with my mouth. I did it, or my irresponsibility, I did it cold, stone, sober. I was actually probably a nice guy when I was drunk. But I mean, the crap I did, I did it cold, stone, sober. So what happens if the disease does center in your mind and not your body? And alcoholism is a symptom of your disease. What if cheating on your wife is a symptom of the disease? What if spending more money than you make is a symptom? What if stealing is a symptom of your disease? What if laziness is what if just worrying about yourself and not giving a crap about other people is a symptom? Well, there may be a lot of symptoms of this disease. What about being drunk on self-pity or on depression like Bill Wilson was at 22 years when it stopped working for him? What about that deal? What if the disease is always there waiting to pounce on you, and the greatest thing that can happen to the disease is just like they say in the old days, when you're sober and in AA meetings, the disease is in the parking lot doing push-ups, just waiting for you to let your guard down, because the truth is you don't believe any of this God shit. And the real truth is You're not going to believe anything anybody tells you because your chief characteristic, according to the 12 and 12, is defiance. Which means, this is what defiance means. You don't want anybody to ever tell you what you should do or what you should believe. You will make the decision of what you choose to believe. And that defiance is so strong, it scares the shit out of every alcoholic and Alcoholics Anonymous. So, we'll talk about the 4th step, we'll talk about the 5th step, we'll talk about the 9th step, we'll talk about it, but never in AA should you ever talk too much, as a point, on the God of your understanding or your walk with God. So they'll come in here and they'll tell you to do all sorts of things, just all sorts of things, go to meetings, but nobody's going to tell you, well, you should really do this, or you should believe this, or you should believe that. First of all, it doesn't work with alcoholics, okay? They're going to hate you. You know what I mean? That's number one. So never do that. So basically, if you're in AA and you're a non-believer, and most people that come to AA are non-believers, or they're pissed off at God, they were once believers, and you know that because every meeting you go to, you hear 15,000 people saying things like, well, I had a real problem with the God thing. I had a real problem with the God. There's 2 things you can count on in AA. People saying I had a problem with drinking and I had a real problem with the God thing. So the greatest meeting an alcoholic can go to is an AA meeting where everybody's talking about drinking and nobody's talking about God. And if somebody starts talking about God, they get sort of upset. So what we do, and we all know this inside, deep down inside, we just shut our mouths when it comes. So what happens is you come into AA, and the program says, there is one who has all power. That one is God. May you find him now. And the fellowship says, you can talk about anything in AA, but don't give anybody any guidance on God. They're on their own. And we talk, and we sort of hope that somewhere along the way, maybe before they hit 20 or 30 years, they're going to figure this thing out. But most of them don't. And most of them wind up, even where Bill Wilson wound up, and where I wound up, quite frankly, at 22 years sober, depressed, anxious, saying he doesn't understand what happened. He has no idea why, as the founder of AA, who wrote the book and wrote all these books, he should wind up 22 years, depressed. And that he sees a lot of these old-timers, oldsters he calls them, that have no emotional sobriety. They've passed the booze test. They haven't drank. And, of course, once you start picking up them medallions, you know you're doing great because that's how we measure sobriety here. How many medallions, how many years you have. I got double ditch, I got this, that, and the other thing. The only problem is the more you think you're doing this and you're in charge and you got the power, the more you have the power to stay sober, the less you'll ever have any connection to God. You know, there's this great line in the Bible. It's a very interesting line by the Apostle Paul. He said that he came to believe in God. He gave his life to God. But somehow, some way, even though he gave his life to God, he was being hounded by this crazy problem that was killing him. And he got down, this is the exact words. He says, I got down on my, he calls it a thorn in his flesh. You all got it, by the way. You got the thorn. You know you got the thorn. Comes up at 3 o'clock in the morning. You know you got the deal, the alcoholism. You know you're not cured. You know you're not drinking, but you know you're crazy. You know you're anxious. You know you're scared. You know everything that's going on, and you know that no matter how many meetings you go to, it'll stop you from drinking. But you know 2 hours later, back at home, it's back again. That deal, it's back again. You can say the Serenity prayer. You got all sorts of tools. Make you feel a little bit better for a while, but then it comes back again. The money, the property, the prestige, the loneliness. You know you still got the thorn. He had the thorn. He wasn't being rocked in the 4th dimension of existence. And so he had that thorn, and he said, this is what he said, I prayed to God 3 times to remove it from me. And he says, this is what God said to him. and he's counted as a pretty spiritual guy. He said, God said to him, I will not take this away from me to keep you from becoming conceited. Conceited. You know, being a know-it-all and thinking you had it all together. He said, keep you from good, because when you're weak, that's when you're strong. When you're on your knees and you're dying, that's when you pick up a white chip in Alcoholics Anonymous. That's when you ask somebody to be your sponsor. That's when you actually go up to somebody and say, I got a problem. You know what I mean? Not when you're strong. And then he says this great line. This is a great line. He says, my power is made perfect in your weakness. The more you realize you're nothing, and you are nothing without God, and you're not even sober without God, the more you're going to be able to have my power. I mean, that's what that means. That's what AA is all about. And there's so many things I've left out. How about, they have that part, if you want to be rocked in the fourth dimension of existence, you know what being rocked in the fourth dimension of existence means? One of the things it says, you will not only be rocked in the fourth dimension of existence, you'll know heaven as few do. You guys all the time know heaven as few do. And you'll be at peace. You'll be at peace. Things won't bother you. You'll just be at peace. And you want to get that? It says all you have to do is the great fact. That's all you have to do, the great fact. You know what the great fact is? I'll tell you what it is. I happen to know what the great fact is. It's this and nothing less than this. Don't get mad at me. Call up New York and tell them to rip it out of the book. The great fact is this. That God must be the central fact of your life. The number one thing in your life. That's the central fact. And you are convinced, not an agnostic, not an atheist, you're convinced that God is doing for you what you cannot do for yourself, that he lives in your heart and mind in a way which is indeed miraculous, doing what you can't do for yourself. Now, what happens if you do all this stuff and you go to the meetings for 10 years and everything like that, but you're not convinced of any of that stuff? You're sort of lukewarm on it. You say, well, I don't want to hear too much about the God thing. I don't know. I don't want to hear that guy. Pat Rogan used to say when he first came to see, he says, I don't want to hear that Russell God. All he does is talk about God, What if you just, that sort of pisses you off, you know what I mean? That sort of stuff. So you don't want to hear about it. So here's the deal. Here's Bill Wilson. I'm just like Bill Wilson. This is exactly what happened to me. So here's what happens. Bill Wilson has a white light experience. The room lights up. He said, so this is the God of the prophets. This is the God thing. He says, and then he walks in and he talks like a month or two later to Bill Dotson, who's the man on the bed. And Bill Dotson says, I was sober. He says, I was sober, but I knew I was missing something. I knew I was missing something. A release, a happiness that I thought a person ought to have. And Bill came to see me. I was trying to figure it out. And Bill said this. This is Bill Wilson. He said, the Lord, who he was talking about, and there was nobody there to tell him you can't do that. The Lord has been so wonderful to me, curing me of this terrible disease that I have to keep on talking about it and telling other people. That's Bill Wilson. Bill Wilson. So if you think that I'm kind of crazy because I keep on talking about it and telling other people, it's because I have that same problem that Bill Wilson has. He's been so wonderful to me, curing me of this disease, that I have to keep on talking about it and telling other people. The only difference is, and it's not much of a difference because I lost it too, is 2 months later, after saying that to everybody and being gaga and excited, he said, but soon worldly clamors, mostly within myself, blocked out his presence. Blocked out his presence. And that's when he went up to Henrietta Seibel and he says, I don't think we should talk about God. And she said, are you kidding me? That's the only reason you're sober. You got to stop worrying about what alcoholics think. You know what worldly clamors are? So you get out of your AA meeting, you hold hands, maybe you say the Lord's Prayer. That's your God thing. So now you're thoroughly convinced in God and everything like that. And then you go up and you worry about how am I going to pay the mortgage. And then you go out and worry about when am I going to get a husband? When am I going to get a wife? And then you go out and worry about why can't I lose 50 pounds? Then you go out and worry about why can't I get a new car? And then you go and worry about I can't believe I have a flat. And then you are inundated for the rest of your natural life by watching, you turn on TV and there's a Viagra commercial because you're 70 years old and you're not getting laid every second, and now you got to worry about that. You know what I mean? Or there's people on vacation and going places, and you're looking at that and say, why don't I have that? Why don't I have this? And they talk about investing in gold. You are inundated 24/7 with the things of this world, with the worldly clamors, 24/7, nonstop. You look at the movie stars, everybody's looking up at it and everything like that. You go to one AA meeting a day, if you're lucky. If you go to one AA meeting a day, they hardly ever mention about God, but you get your, okay, we're going to say the Lord's Prayer, and you do this right, and that's it. That's it for you. You're fixed. And then you go out there and you got worldly clamors. And you heard what Bill Wilson said, but soon worldly clamors blocked out his presence. And you can't understand, and you look at somebody like me, who says, my entire world revolves around the Lord. Well, I do say, you say, well, how the hell do you do that shit? I don't know how to do that crap. I wouldn't even say that stuff, you know? I'd be scared to say that stuff. What makes you think that the worldly clamors doesn't affect you just like it affected me? You know what happened to me? I did 10 years of straight, unbelievable. I compare it to anybody. It's banquet chairman for 2 years in a row, 8 years on relay in Dade County. I sponsoring everything in sight, doing all the steps, doing step meetings like this. And at 10 years sober, I reached the same exact point with double-digit sobriety that Bill Wilson reached at 22 years. If you guys have ever bothered to read The Next Frontier in Emotional Sobriety, I reached a dead end. And you know something? And I doubled up on my meetings, and I was still a basket case. And I sponsored another person, and I was still a basket case. And I did another 4-step, and I was still a basket case. So what do you do when the steps stop working, and I went to the meetings? And you know what they told me? Don't drink and go to meetings. Do another 4-step. Because nobody's talking about it, and I didn't know what the problem is. When I was 3 months sober, I go to a meeting, okay? And there was a guy speaking. I've told you this story, but it bears telling you again. His name's Al Kennedy. Never seen it before, never seen it afterwards. He does this incredible talk. He was just so comfortable with these people. He was just sharing honestly. I mean, this guy was so comfortable in his skin. He was so uplifting. He was helping other people. And then he left. He went to leave, and everybody clapped for him. He had like 40-something years. I say to my sponsor, where can I go see that guy? I'd like to hang out with him, you know, and maybe he's got some, I want what he has. And my sponsor says to me, well, he's dying. And so, of course, I thought my sponsor didn't hear me. Because, you know, my sponsor was always saying stupid stuff like that, you know. I would ask him a question, and, you know, I'd call him up and say, I have a flat tire. He says, you have a car? You know, I mean, he would always say stuff like, look at all my degrees on the wall. He says, hey, you know, Russ, rectal thermometers have degrees. You know what they do with those? You know what I mean? I mean, my sponsor was the best sarcastic bastard you could ever see in your life. But there was always, even though it would bother you, nothing that helps alcoholics more than hitting somebody who says shit that bothers the shit out of them. You know what I mean? So they can't forget it. They walk away, they just can't forget this. That's why I still talk about it today. Because it's like they put a nail in your brain. You can't forget stuff like that. You want to have that kind of sponsor that says something or does something that affects you, so 20 years later you'll never forget when he said this. Because there's a lesson in all those things. And so I just thought this was one of those things, you know what I mean? You know, I needed money. What am I going to do for money? I'm broke. You know, I'm an attorney. I don't have any money. I got 4 kids, blah, blah, blah. He says, oh, I got the solution for you. You do? He says, yeah. Speak to me after meeting. I go up to him after meeting. He marches me over to the coffee machine. He says, this is how you make it. He starts telling me how to make the coffee. I'm saying to myself, I obviously didn't explain this to him properly. You know what I mean? I mean, I love AA, but I mean, we're talking to my money. You know, it's not important. Just right up there with oxygen. And he's telling me how to make the coffee and how to do this and how to do that. And the next day I was supposed to come and make the coffee, but I didn't want to go because I was still broke and I didn't know what I was going to do. And I was worried and I was going crazy. I wasn't drinking. I was just going crazy with anxiety about what's going to happen to me, which is alcoholism, by the way. I was just feeling self-pity, which is alcoholism, by the way. I was just feeling sorry for myself, which is alcoholism, by the way. I was just angry, which is alcoholism, by the way. You know? That's all it is, alcoholism. And then but I went because I was worried about what people would think about me if I didn't show up, which is alcoholism, by the way, but it actually worked. He did like spiritual jiu-jitsu to me, and I went up and I did make coffee for 18 months for that stupid group. And after 3 months, the money came in. Some guy came up to me and says, "I'll make the coffee." I said, "I'm the coffee maker. Who the hell appointed you?" You know? But the bottom line is, I know that I didn't have, but the bottom line is I was like the Apostle Paul. I'm praying for this thing to be removed. And no matter how much I'm praying, no matter how many medallions I'm picking up, I still got it. It's like syrup on my hands. I can't get rid of it. I still got this thing. It's not a drinking thing. It's a thing where I just can't handle life. It's just difficult for me. And now I can't even talk about it because I got 10 years, I got 12 years, I'm in the group, I'm doing the meetings. What am I going to do? Sit down with my group and say, "I just want to tell you, I was thinking about killing myself last night." And I got people coming up to me saying, "Oh, you really helped me." You know what I mean? What am I going to do? Now I got that false pride. And I think, well, I'm doing okay because I got all these medallions, but I'm not doing okay. So he tells me Al Kennedy is dying. He says, he's got cancer. He's got 6 months to live. I said, "What are you talking about? He just did that meeting." I said, "Yeah." He says, "He was happier than everybody in the room." I said, "Russ, all I can tell you," he didn't even mention it. I said, "Russ, all I'm telling you is he's got 6 months to live." And I said to and this is what I said, I saw this in an A meeting. And I've seen this several times with certain people, not a lot of people. Most people are thumb-sucking crybabies. Most people are not recovered. Most people just don't drink. They haven't drank. You know what I mean? And you can get mad at that, but that's fine. Very few Al Kennedys. And I saw this thing, and I couldn't believe it. And I remember thinking to myself, I wish I could be like that. I remember saying, I wish I could be like that. How do you do that? I know how to stop drinking. How do you get to that point where you're dying and it doesn't bother you? And I've seen other people. This is not a one-shot deal. I had a sponsor. So I go up to the guy and I say to him, when I have 10 years sober, I'm going through what Bill Wilson went through. And you know what Bill Wilson came to the conclusion? You got to read this book. He came to the conclusion. This is what he said. Our king of AA, who wrote the book, who wrote everything, he came to the conclusion. This is what he says. I got it all wrong. That's got to make you feel really good. You know what I mean? It's not that he got it all wrong with the drinking. AA will solve your drinking problem. What they don't tell you, and there's no way they could tell you. Bill Wilson sort of indicated it. I think God had him get it. He said, there'll come a time in every alcoholic's life. We'll have it. After he comes into AA, well, he'll have no defense against the first drink. It has to come from God. It's all about God, find the power of God. It says, very often we see a guy who says, feel better, look better, having a better time. We laugh. So Sally knows he's going to try the whole game again, sober, because he's not happy with sobriety. Soon to know loneliness as few do. That's a sober guy. It doesn't say it happens at 6 months or 11 months or 20 months or 10 years. It could happen 52 times. It happened to Bill Wilson at 22 years. It happened to me at 10 years. And I've seen it happen hundreds and hundreds of times to people I know. I've seen people come out of it. And you know what his conclusion was? This is Bill Wilson's conclusion. He said, I got it all wrong, but I finally realized my problem was I was so dependent upon the worldly glamours. Duh. He knew that when he first wrote the book. When he first wrote the book, he knew that. It blocked out. But he didn't really know it. He knew it, but he didn't know it. He knew it, but he didn't believe it. He didn't believe that the worldly clamors could block out God, and because he was picking up the medallions, everybody was telling him how good he was. But at 22 years, he said, I got it all wrong, but my real problem was I was still too dependent on people, places, and things, and on Alcoholics Anonymous. You know how people say, well, I don't want to hear about church. I'm a recovered Catholic. I don't want to do this. I don't want to do that. You know, for most people, AA is their church. They think, well, church people are, self-righteous. The most self-righteous people in the world are reformed alcoholics who look down on people in church and everybody else because they're so fucking spiritual and not, what are they, spiritual but not religious? You know what I mean? The most disgusting crap in the world. And they're the ones that end up drinking again. Or stay sober and they're miserable. And that's what Bill Wilson finally said? This was the answer. He said, I knew the answer. He was reading the prayer of St. Francis of Assisi. I knew the answer was in the prayer. I knew the answer. You know what Dr. Bob said? Dr. Bob said, if you're an atheist or an agnostic, you have some sort of intellectual pride that keeps you from understanding what we're talking about, keeps you from that. He says, I feel sorry for you. Your Heavenly Father will never let you down. It's all about the God thing. You can do every step of the word. You can get 20 years, 30 years. You're not going to get what really you need to get unless you give it up, unless you bend the knee. So this guy told me at 10 years, and I was desperate. He said, you need to start going to Bible study. You go to AA, and you keep on going to AA, but you need to go to Bible study, because you know why? You need to go to a place that gives you something that AA is not giving you, where people are talking about and helping you define and helping you find God. Not God of your understanding, because you don't understand shit. A God of his. You need to find a God of his understanding. So I went to AA. And you know what I found? I found 40 or 50 men who were 20 and 30 years older than me that was talking about all the defects we talk about, all the stuff we talk about. But the only thing they talked about in AA is the only thing I talk about is God and your relationship with God and who he is and what he is. And I read that book that they were reading that they were reading in the first 4 years of AA, the Bible. I read all the thing, and I started to put flesh on the bones of that deal. And it was no longer God as I understand it. It was God as how St. Francis understood it. It was God as how Bob Smith understood it. You know, it was God as how who's that other guy? The other guy, the well-known clergyman who did the 6-step, growing in the image like So what I did was, my God wasn't working, and I needed to find God. So you know what I did? I stole their God. I stole him, which wasn't really a theft, because they were giving the son of a gun away. They were giving it away, you know what I mean? So I snatched that sucker, because mine wasn't working, and the more I snatched it, the more it worked. And I started asking myself, why was I so pissed off about this? Why was I so mad about this? Well, number one, I didn't want the God thing, because God had rules. And I don't like rules, because I want to do whatever I want to do to whoever I want to do it to, whenever I want to do it, and I don't want anybody criticizing me. And the problem is that made me God. And I'm not really a good governor of myself, because I just do a lot of stuff, and I don't even think I'm doing anything wrong, and you can't ever tell me I'm doing anything wrong. You know what I mean? Because you got your God and I got my God, and, you know, I do it my way and you do it your way, which is sort of kind of childish and goofy, but in any event, and it's certainly not what the big book is talking about, you know? And that hit me at 10 years. And even after 10 years, I'd be going, and then I got a sponsor who had 50 years sobriety. He was a pastor. He used to go to me at AA meetings. And he was dying. I remember when he was dying, he looked at me. He's dying. And he said, this is what he said to me. He said, Russ, don't worry about me. I'm excited. My bags are packed. I'm ready to go. I'm ready to go to see the Lord. And there was nobody in AA saying that shit. I found that guy in a Bible study. And he used to go there. I found that guy and he had 50 years sobriety. And, you know, here's what happened to me. And here's the last thing he says. What happened was I looked around at all these guys that were going to Bible study. And many of them were alcoholics. And I looked around AA, and I realized I wanted what they had. I didn't want what the people had in AA. Now, that may make you feel bad. You may get pissed at me, but there may come a time in your life, you know, this ain't Well People's Anonymous, where you get everything that AA has to offer. The not drinking, the 5 years, the 10 years, and you're looking around, and like that old song, is that all there is? And you realize there's something missing. It's all about problems in your life and overcoming them and all sort of stuff. And I hung around with a group of men that they were in a whole different deal. And, you know, they were all the Al Kennedys. You know that guy, Al Kennedy? They were hanging out. And I wanted what they had. And I was willing to go to any length to get it. And so I started focusing on them and what they were doing. And that's what I started focusing on. And who you hang out with. You remember that line that says in the big book? It says, God will show you how to create the fellowship you crave. And that's the fellowship I crave. And that's who I hang out with these days. And you know, when I go to my meetings now, like a meeting like this one, let's say, or a meeting like that, a convention, you know, I just talk about what I talk about in all my meetings. Just like I'm talking to you what I'm talking about. Now, you know, I just talk about God. I don't talk about drinking. I mean, I did mention drinking. Didn't I mention drinking? Didn't I mention the resentments? Didn't I mention world? Didn't I talk all about the big book? Isn't everything I said in the big book? Yes. So didn't I talk about alcoholism? But if they ask you, so what did Russ talk about? He says, God. He said, yeah, that's what he does. His main focus, all he wants to do is talk about God. You know what I mean? So you see, you can do an AA meeting and talk about God all the time. You know, every once in a while somebody will throw something at you, you know, but that's okay. Or they'll get mad. But I like the guys to get mad. You know, I like the ideas of people being out there like a week from now saying, I hate that son of a bitch. Who called, you know, I like that, you know, pissing off alcoholics, because that's how we get sober. We either drink and carry resentment, and we say, why is this pissing me off so much? Whenever I'm disturbed, there's something wrong. Why am I so mad at this guy? Why does it bother me so much? Because I'm bothered because maybe I have to do it, and I don't want to do it. I don't want to do that. You know, why don't I want to do it? I don't know. Contempt prior to investigation. Oh, that's in the book too. You know, so here's the good news. So this meeting, I think, was all about the 11th step. It was about my 11th step, right? It's not about your 11th step. How you become slow, and then all of a sudden one day you wake up and all you're doing is thinking about God and you're talking about God. And you're like Bill Wilson was when he first came in. Lord's been so one day talking about God, and you say, how did that happen? I don't know how it happened. It wasn't my doing. It just happened. And that's the way it is today. So that's my 11 steps. So this is an 11-step meeting. Okay? Has nothing to do with you guys. Thank you very much.
Recovery inspiration is sitting right there waiting for you. Rocketed.org AA speaker recordings brings real voices and real stories straight to your ears. Subscribe now so you never miss a new recording dropping. Keep that motivation on tap and help spread the word. Hit subscribe and let recovery find you every single day.